"Ma'am, you need to step aside." The voice was sharp, impatient, and loud enough for half the bank lobby to hear. Evelyn Carter tightened her grip on her purse, but didn't move. "I'm next," she said calmly, her voice soft but steady. The young teller didn't bother hiding her sigh. "No, you're not," she replied, tapping the counter with a manicured nail. "You've been standing there for 10 minutes. The ATM is right over there." A few people in line shifted uncomfortably. Someone behind Evelyn muttered, "Unbelievable." Another whispered, "Why don't they ever learn?" Evelyn felt the heat rise in her chest, not anger yet, just the familiar sting of being dismissed. "I don't use ATMs," she said. The teller laughed, not cruelly, casually, like Evelyn had just said something silly. "Well, that's how we do things now," the woman replied. "You can't hold up the line." Evelyn turned slightly, finally noticing how long the line behind her had grown. Young professionals checking phones, a mother bouncing a toddler on her hip, a man in a suit glaring openly at her. She was used to looks like that. Looks that said, "You're in the way." Looks that said, "You're too old for this world now." "I need to speak with a banker," Evelyn repeated. The teller leaned forward, lowering her voice, but not enough. "Ma'am, this isn't 1985. If you don't know how to use an ATM, maybe bring someone with you next time." A few people chuckled. That was when it happened. The man behind Evelyn stepped forward aggressively, his breath hot with coffee and impatience. "Lady, are you serious right now?" he snapped. "I've got a meeting in 10 minutes. Either move or let someone else go." Evelyn's fingers trembled around the worn leather of her purse. She was 72 years old. She had lived through things that man couldn't imagine, and yet here she was, being spoken to like a nuisance. "I waited my turn," she said quietly. The man scoffed. "You've been standing there forever. The ATM is empty. What's your problem?" Her problem. Evelyn swallowed. For a moment, she considered stepping aside, letting it go, doing what she had learned to do her whole life. Don't make trouble. But something inside her refused. Not today. "I don't trust ATMs," she said again, louder this time. The teller rolled her eyes. "Ma'am, that's ridiculous. They're perfectly safe." Another voice chimed in from the line. "My grandma uses the ATM just fine." More murmurs, more pressure. Evelyn felt small, not because she was weak, but because the room had decided she was. She took a slow breath. "I'd like to speak with the branch manager." The teller's smile vanished. "You can't just demand—" "Please," Evelyn interrupted. "I have business to conduct." The teller hesitated, clearly annoyed, then pressed a button beneath the counter. "Manager to the front," she said flatly. The line groaned in unison. "Oh, come on. This is unbelievable. Some people just refuse to adapt." Evelyn stared straight ahead, her back straight, her heart pounding. She had faced worse than this, but that didn't make it hurt less. A few moments later, a man in his late 40s emerged from an office, crisp suit, practiced smile. "What seems to be the issue?" he asked. Before Evelyn could speak, the teller jumped in. "She refuses to use the ATM and holding up the line." The man glanced at Evelyn, then at the growing crowd. "Ma'am, our ATMs are very user-friendly. Most of our customers prefer them." "I'm not most customers," Evelyn replied. The manager tilted his head. "Is there a reason you won't use it?" The room seemed to lean in. Evelyn looked around the bank, at the cameras, the machines, the glowing screens, the impatient faces. Then she looked back at the manager. "Yes," she said, "there is." Her voice didn't shake, but her eyes did. "I don't trust ATMs," she repeated, "because the last time I trusted a machine with my money—" She paused. "I lost everything." The bank went quiet, not the awkward kind, the listening kind. The manager frowned. "Lost everything?" Evelyn nodded slowly. "And before you tell me I don't understand technology, I worked as a bookkeeper for 34 years. That drew a few raised eyebrows. "I balanced ledgers by hand. I caught mistakes computers missed. I trained people half your age." She looked directly at the teller now. "But I also learned something the hard way." The manager gestured towards the chair. "Please, ma'am, sit." Evelyn didn't sit. She reached into her purse. Her fingers brushed something smooth and folded, something she had not planned to show anyone today. But maybe this was why she had come. "I don't trust ATMs," Evelyn said, her voice firm now, "because they don't remember people." She pulled out an old, creased envelope. "And I do." The manager's eyes dropped to what she held. His expression changed. Completely. Because printed across the front of that envelope, faded but unmistakable, was the logo of the same bank and a date from 41 years ago.
The envelope trembled slightly in Evelyn Carter's hand. Not because she was nervous, she had stood her ground against far worse than a crowded bank lobby, but because memory has weight, and some memories never get lighter, no matter how many decades pass. The manager's eyes remained fixed on the faded logo. "This bank," Evelyn said slowly, "used to have a very different name." The manager blinked. "Ma'am?" She looked up at him, her gaze steady, sharp with lived truth. "Before the mergers, before the rebranding, before the glass walls and touchscreen machines." The room felt smaller now. Even the people who had been grumbling minutes earlier had gone quiet, curiosity overtaking impatience. Evelyn unfolded the envelope carefully, as if it might tear under the strain of time. Inside was a brittle receipt, yellowed, creased, hand-stamped. She held it up. "This," she said, "is a withdrawal slip." The manager stepped closer. The teller leaned forward despite herself. "It's dated June 14th, 1983, for every dollar I had saved." A young man in line squinted. "That can't be real." Evelyn didn't look at him. "I was 31 years old, newly married, pregnant, working 2 jobs, saving through a house that the realtors swore we could afford." She let out a small, humorless breath. "I trusted this bank." The manager cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I'm very sorry, but records from that long ago were lost," Evelyn finished for him. "Yes, I know." She tapped the receipt. "They told me that the same day my account balance showed 0. A ripple passed through the crowd. "0?" someone whispered. Evelyn nodded. "I came in just like this, stood in line, waited my turn, smiled politely." Her lips tightened. "And when I got to the counter, the young man behind it told me there must have been a mistake." She swallowed. "They said my account had been closed." The manager frowned deeply now. "Closed by whom?" Evelyn laughed softly. "That's what I asked." She lowered the paper, her hands steady despite the tremor in her chest. "They said I had authorized a full withdrawal 2 days earlier, in cash." A woman near the door shook her head. "That's impossible." "It was," Evelyn agreed. "I was at work that day. I had witnesses, time cards, pay stubs." She paused, her voice lowering. "And the computer said otherwise." The teller shifted uncomfortably. "And the computer," Evelyn said, "was never wrong." The manager opened his mouth to respond, then stopped. "What happened next?" he asked quietly. Evelyn's gaze drifted past him, past the bank walls, to somewhere much farther away. "I was told to file a claim," she said, "which I did." She folded the receipt again, slower now. "I was told it would be investigated." She slid the envelope back into her purse. "And I was told to wait." A bitter smile crossed her face. "So I did." The bank was completely silent. "I waited weeks, then months. I called, I came in, I wrote letters." She lifted her chin. "And every time I was told the same thing." She mimicked the voice with eerie accuracy. "Our system shows the funds were withdrawn legally." The manager's jaw tightened. "And when I asked to see the footage," she continued, "when I asked for signatures," she shook her head. "Lost, corrupted, unavailable." A man near the back muttered, "Unbelievable." Evelyn met his eyes. "Oh, it gets worse." The manager exhaled slowly.
"Ma'am, what happened to your family?" Evelyn hesitated, not because she didn't want to answer, but because some truths cost something to say. "My husband and I fought, not because of the money, but because of what it meant." Her fingers tightened around her purse strap. "We lost the house deposit, the seller backed out, the interest rates jumped." She paused. "And then my husband lost his job." The air felt heavy now, like a storm pressing down. "We moved in with his sister. I went back to work 3 weeks after giving birth." A few gasps rippled through the crowd. "I didn't sleep, I didn't eat, I kept telling myself we'd recover." She met the manager's gaze again. "But you know what never recovered?" Her voice cracked, just slightly. "My trust." The manager looked shaken. "I never got that money back," Evelyn said. "Not a dollar." The teller's face had gone pale. "Ma'am," the manager said quietly, "if this happened today, we would—" "You didn't then," Evelyn interrupted. She straightened her shoulders. "And that's why I don't use ATMs." A pause. "Because when a machine makes a mistake, it doesn't look you in the eye while it tells you there's nothing it can do." The manager nodded slowly. "I'm truly sorry." Evelyn studied him for a moment. "I don't need your apology," she said. "I needed it 41 years ago." She gestured around the bank. "You see screens and convenience. I see a system that forgot me once and never looked back." Silence stretched. The man who had yelled at her earlier shifted his weight. "I didn't know," he muttered. Evelyn turned to him. "You didn't ask," she replied gently. That hit harder than anger ever could. The manager took a breath. "Ma'am, if you're willing, I would like to review this personally." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "After 40 decades?" He nodded. "Because this shouldn't have happened," he said firmly, "and because if it did, we owe you more than an apology." Evelyn considered him for a long moment. Then she reached back into her purse. She pulled out a second paper, thicker, newer, a bank statement. "Before we do that," Evelyn said quietly, "there's something else you should know." The manager leaned closer. "I didn't come here today to withdraw money." The room held its breath. "I came here to close an account." Murmurs spread instantly. "Close? After all this?" Evelyn nodded. "Because history has a way of repeating itself, and I won't be silent twice." She slid the statement across the counter. The manager's eyes scanned the number. His breath caught, because the balance staring back at him was not small, not at all. And suddenly, everyone in that bank understood something crucial. Evelyn Carter wasn't just an old woman holding up a line. She was someone the bank could not afford to ignore. Not anymore.
The manager stared at the statement for far longer than politeness required. Too long. Evelyn noticed it immediately. When you've lived as long as she had, you learn to read people the way others read headlines. His fingers tightened just slightly around the paper. His eyes moved left to right, then back again. Once more, slower this time. The balance at the bottom of the page was unmistakable. 6 figures. Not inherited wealth, not sudden fortune. The kind of money built quietly, deliberately, over decades of discipline. The kind of money people didn't expect an elderly black woman with a worn purse and sensible shoes to have. The teller leaned forward, trying not to stare. The line behind Evelyn had completely stopped breathing. "I don't understand," the manager said finally, lowering his voice. "This account has been active for years." Evelyn nodded. "At a different institution." The manager blinked. "You bank elsewhere?" "I diversify," she replied calmly. "Something I learned the hard way." She tapped the counter once with her finger. "After 1983. A flush crept up the manager's neck. "I only came here today," Evelyn continued, "because my pension deposit was rerouted during a system update." She gestured vaguely toward the ATMs. "I wanted to speak to a human being." A bitter smile tugged at her lips. "That seems to be harder than it used to be." The manager cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I assure you that your systems are secure," Evelyn finished. She tilted her head slightly. "You know," she said, "that's exactly what they told me last time." A low murmur rippled through the waiting customers. The manager folded the statement neatly, then unfolded it again as if hoping the numbers would change. "They don't match," he said. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "What doesn't?" He hesitated. "Our internal routing records show a temporary holding account was created during the merger." The word merger landed heavily in the air. "Which merger?" Evelyn asked. The manager swallowed. "The tri-state consolidation in the early 80s. Several people exchanged looks. "That was 1982, someone whispered. Evelyn's eyes sharpened. "Was it?" she asked quietly. The manager nodded slowly, now clearly uncomfortable. "And what year did my money disappear?" Evelyn asked. The manager didn't answer right away. 1983, he said at last. The silence that followed felt electric. "You're telling me," Evelyn said carefully, "that during a merger, temporary accounts were created, and the year after, my entire life savings vanished?" The manager's mouth opened, closed. "I'm saying," he replied cautiously, "that there are discrepancies." A man near the back scoffed. "That's corporate talk for 'we messed up.'" The manager shot him a look, then turned back to Evelyn. "I need to escalate this," he said. "May I ask, why didn't you pursue legal action at the time?" Evelyn's gaze hardened. "Because I was tired. Because I was pregnant. Because I was told no lawyer would take the case." She exhaled slowly. "And because I was young enough to still believe that if I worked harder, I could outrun injustice." A few heads bowed. The teller whispered, "That's not right." Evelyn looked at her. "No," she agreed. "It wasn't." The manager glanced at the line, then made a decision. "Please," he said, gesturing toward his office, "let's continue this privately." A murmur of protest rose immediately. "No," someone said, "let her stay. She has every right." Evelyn considered the manager for a moment. Then she shook her head. "No," she said, "we'll stay right here." She turned slightly, addressing the room without raising her voice. "Because when these things happen quietly, they happen again." The manager nodded stiffly. "All right, right here." He tapped a few commands into the terminal behind the counter. The screen reflected faintly in his glasses. "I'm pulling archived logs. They're slow." Evelyn waited. She had waited before. She could wait again. But this time, she was not alone. Minutes passed. The bank's normal rhythm had collapsed entirely. No one complained. No one checked their phone. The manager frowned. "That's odd." Evelyn leaned slightly closer. "What is?" "There are gaps, entire months missing from certain ledgers." A woman gasped softly. "Missing?" "Yes," he said. "Not erased, just inaccessible." Evelyn felt something stir in her chest. Not anger. Recognition. They were never missing. They were hidden. The manager looked at her. "They were hidden." His fingers paused above the keyboard. "Ma'am, I said that would imply deliberate action." Evelyn met his gaze without blinking. "Do you know how many black families lost everything during that merger?" Evelyn asked quietly. He shook his head. "Neither did I, until years later." She shifted her weight, her voice steady but cutting. "I started noticing patterns. Friends from church, co-workers, neighbors." She looked around the room. "People who saved, people who trusted, people who were told the same story." The manager's face had gone pale. "System error, unverifiable withdrawal, records unavailable." She smiled sadly. "Different words, same outcome." The teller whispered, "My grandmother said something like that happened to her." Evelyn turned to her. "Did she bank here?" The teller nodded slowly. The room buzzed now, tension rising like static. The manager straightened. "I need to make a call, now." He stepped aside, speaking urgently into his phone. Evelyn watched him, her hands resting calmly on the counter. She felt the weight of years pressing forward, not crushing, but demanding acknowledgement. The man who had yelled earlier cleared his throat. "I owe you an apology. I thought you were just holding things up."
Evelyn smiled gently. You thought what you were taught to think. That's how systems survive. The manager returned, his face tight. I've spoken with regional compliance. They're concerned. That's a start, Evelyn replied. They've authorized a full audit of accounts affected by the 1982-1983 merger. A wave of murmurs rolled through the bank. And? Evelyn asked. And, he said carefully, there may be grounds for restitution. The word hit like thunder. Restitution? Someone echoed. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. Not in relief, in resolution. I don't want just my money. I want the truth. The manager nodded. I believe, he said, they're about to discover the two are connected. A chime sounded suddenly. The terminal beeped. The manager looked down. His breath caught. I've found something, he said quietly. Evelyn leaned in. What is it? He swallowed. It's a holding account, unclaimed, dormant. He turned the screen slightly so she could see. The number was familiar. Her old account number, with a balance far larger than what she had lost, because it included interest. 41 years of it. The room erupted. Gasps, shouts, hands over mouths. That's impossible, the teller whispered. No, Evelyn said softly. That's math. The manager stared at the screen. It was never withdrawn. It was displaced. Evelyn nodded. Hidden, she corrected. He looked at her shaken. Ma'am, this changes everything. Evelyn straightened, her voice calm but unyielding. No, she said. This finally makes things right. But deep down, she knew something else too. Because numbers don't lie. But people do. And someone, somewhere, had worked very hard to make sure no one ever added them up. Until today.
The bank no longer felt like a place of quiet transactions. It felt like a courtroom. Phones rang unanswered. Tellers stood frozen behind their counters. A security guard hovered near the entrance, unsure whether to block the doors or protect the woman standing calmly at the center of it all. Evelyn Carter, 82 years old, standing straighter than anyone else in the room. The manager rubbed his temples, then looked at her again, as if hoping she might suddenly disappear and take the problem with her. Ms. Carter, he said carefully, this account hasn't been accessed in over 4 decades. That's because every time I asked about it, Evelyn replied evenly, I was told it didn't exist. She reached into her purse and pulled out a thin, yellowed envelope. Gasps rippled through the crowd as she slid its contents onto the counter. Original deposit slips, handwritten ledger copies, a carbon copy receipt stamped with the bank's old logo. The manager stared. These, he whispered, these are originals. I kept everything, Evelyn said, because my father taught me something when I was 16. She paused, eyes drifting somewhere far away. When people doubt your worth, he said, make them argue with paper. A murmur of approval swept the room. The teller nearest Evelyn leaned closer. You saved all this? I saved what the bank assumed I wouldn't, Evelyn replied. The manager swallowed hard. I need to contact corporate legal, he said. That's fine. They've had 41 years to prepare. He stepped away again, voice hushed but urgent as he spoke into his phone. The room buzzed now. Conversations broke out in whispers. A man near the ATM shook his head. My mother lost her savings in the 80s, said the bank blamed computer errors. An older woman clasped her purse tighter. They told us the records were destroyed in a fire. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. Same lies, different mouths. The manager returned, flanked now by a sharply dressed woman with silver hair and a badge clipped to her jacket. Ms. Carter, the woman said, extending a hand. I'm Helen Brooks, Regional Compliance Officer. Evelyn did not shake her hand. Sit, Evelyn said calmly. Helen blinked, then hesitated. Something in Evelyn's tone,
Not loud, not rude, but immovable. Helen sat. "I've reviewed the preliminary findings," Helen said. "What you've uncovered is concerning." "That's one word for it," Evelyn replied. Helen folded her hands. There was a period during the early digital transition when certain accounts were misclassified. "Misclassified," Evelyn repeated. "Yes," Helen continued, "primarily accounts held by," she paused, "customers with limited digital activity." Evelyn leaned forward slightly. "You mean customers who didn't have home computers in 1983? Helen's lips pressed together. "Yes." "And who were those customers?" Evelyn asked. Helen hesitated. Evelyn didn't. "Black, elderly, working class," she said. "People who trusted tellers instead of terminals." The silence was suffocating. Helen inhaled slowly. "We believe a subset of accounts was diverted into a centralized holding structure." "Diverted," Evelyn said softly. "That's a polite way to say stolen." Helen flinched. "It wasn't personal," she said quickly. "It was procedural." That was when Evelyn's composure finally cracked, just slightly. She laughed. Not loudly, not angrily, but with a sadness that settled deep into the room. "Procedural," Evelyn repeated. "My husband died thinking he failed us. My son worked 2 jobs because I told him we had nothing left. I skipped meals so my grandchildren wouldn't." She looked Helen dead in the eye. "Tell me again how that wasn't personal." Helen's face drained of color. She began, but Evelyn wasn't finished. "You see," Evelyn continued, "ATMs don't judge, they just malfunction." She gestured toward the machines lining the wall. "But people? People decide who gets believed." A young man near the door wiped his eyes. The manager cleared his throat. "Corporate has authorized immediate restitution for Ms. Carter." Applause broke out. Evelyn raised a hand. "No," she said. The room quieted instantly. "I don't want immediate restitution. I want acknowledgement." Helen frowned. "Ms. Carter, I want a written statement," Evelyn continued, "admitting what was done." She turned slightly, addressing the room again. "And I want an independent audit of every account affected during that merger." The manager looked panicked. "That could involve thousands of customers." "Good," Evelyn said. "Then maybe thousands of families will finally sleep better." Helen exchanged a glance with the manager. "That's a significant request," Helen said carefully. Evelyn's voice dropped, calm and sharp. "So was trusting you with my life savings." A beat, then another. Helen exhaled slowly. "I will escalate this, personally." Evelyn nodded. "I'll be waiting." A security guard approached quietly. "Ma'am, reporters are gathering outside." Evelyn smiled faintly. "About time," she said. Helen stiffened. "Media involvement may complicate matters." Evelyn turned to her. "Good," she said again. "Complicated things get remembered." The doors opened briefly as someone entered, letting in the sound of voices and camera shutters. The truth was already escaping the building. The teller leaned towards Evelyn. "Can I get you some water?" Evelyn nodded, then paused. "Actually," she said, "could you bring me a pen and paper?" The teller hurried off. Helen watched, wary. "What are you writing?" Evelyn smiled, the kind of smile that carried decades of patience. "A list of names." Helen stiffened. "What names?" "People who told me no," Evelyn replied, "and people who deserve to hear yes." The teller returned with the supplies. Evelyn wrote slowly, carefully, names from memory, dates, branches, excuses. The manager watched, realization dawning. "You remember all of this?" "I lived it." The pen paused. She added one more name, her own, Evelyn Carter.
She set the pen down. "Now," she said, standing, "let's talk about trust." The room leaned in as one, because for the first time, the bank wasn't controlling the narrative. The woman they ignored was, and everyone could feel it. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about history, and history, once confronted, does not stay quiet.
By the time the glass doors of the bank swung open again, the sidewalk outside had transformed. What had started as a few curious onlookers was now a tight cluster of people, reporters holding microphones, cameras perched on shoulders, phones raised high. Red and blue news logos glared beneath the afternoon sun. Evelyn Carter could hear them before she saw them. "Ma'am, is it true the bank lost your savings? How much money are we talking about? Do you believe this was racially motivated?" The manager's face went pale. Helen Brooks stiffened. "We didn't authorize any statements yet." Evelyn adjusted the strap of her purse. "That's all right," she said calmly. "I did." She stepped forward. The automatic doors slid open, and the noise surged like a wave. Cameras flashed. "Miss Carter," a reporter called, "why did you refuse to use the ATM today?" Evelyn didn't rush. She didn't look overwhelmed. She looked ready. "Because machines don't apologize," she said, "and today I needed one." The crowd went still. "I trusted this bank with my life savings in 1982, she continued. "They told me a computer error erased it. Today, they admitted it was misclassified." She paused deliberately. "That's a polite way of saying it was taken." Gasps rippled through the press. A reporter leaned forward. "Do you have proof?" Evelyn lifted the envelope. "I've been carrying proof longer than some of you have been alive." The manager stepped forward nervously. "Ms. Carter, we're committed to resolving this privately." Evelyn turned her head slowly. "No," she said, "you had 41 years to do that." The cameras caught everything, the tremor in the manager's hand, the rigid set of Helen's jaw. "Who else was affected?" another reporter shouted. Evelyn's eyes swept the crowd. Anyone who was told their records were destroyed. Anyone who was told they should have understood computers better. Anyone who was made to feel foolish for asking questions. Behind her, someone in the crowd said softly, "That was my father." Another voice followed, "My aunt, too." The whispers grew. Inside the bank, panic spread like wildfire. Phones rang nonstop. Tellers whispered to one another. A junior employee hurried past carrying stacks of old files pulled from storage. Helen leaned toward the manager. "Corporate is calling nonstop. This is spreading." Evelyn heard her. "That's what truth does. It spreads." A young reporter raised her hand. "Miss Carter, what do you want now?" Evelyn thought for a moment, not because she didn't know, but because she wanted to say it right. "I want acknowledgement," she said. "I want restitution for every family affected. And I want this bank to stop hiding behind machines." She gestured back toward the ATM. "Technology should serve people, not erase them." The questions kept coming. "How much money did you lose? Do you plan to sue? Why come forward now?" Evelyn answered the last one without hesitation. "Because I'm tired, and tired people tell the truth." That line would be quoted everywhere by nightfall. Inside the bank, the atmosphere had shifted completely. The manager's authority had evaporated. Helen's phone buzzed constantly. Compliance alerts, emergency directives, legal warnings. She finally turned to Evelyn. "Miss Carter," she said quietly, "corporate has approved a full audit." Evelyn nodded once. "And?" "And they're preparing a public apology." A murmur passed through the crowd. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "To whom?" Helen hesitated. "To you." Evelyn shook her head. "Not good enough. Say their names." Helen's eyes flicked to the reporters.
That could expose the bank to accountability? Evelyn finished. Yes, that's the point. A long silence. Then Helen nodded. I'll recommend it, she said. Evelyn studied her for a moment. You weren't there back then, but you're here now. Helen swallowed. Yes, ma'am. For the first time that day, Evelyn smiled, not with triumph, but relief. The manager cleared his throat. Miss Carter, we'd like to invite you into a private office. Evelyn glanced at the reporters. I've been private my whole life. Today, I'm public. Applause broke out. Not loud at first, just a few claps. Then more. Soon the entire sidewalk echoed with it. Evelyn felt something she hadn't in decades. Validation. Later that afternoon, as the sun dipped lower, Evelyn finally sat, not because she was weak, but because she had earned rest. She sat on a bench outside the bank, a bottle of water in her hand. A young man approached hesitantly. My grandmother, he said, voice tight. She lost her savings in the 80s. She thought it was her fault. Evelyn reached out and took his hand. It wasn't, she said. He nodded, eyes wet. Across the street, news vans lined up. Inside the bank, employees worked frantically, pulling records, opening archives long sealed, realizing the ground beneath them was shifting. Helen stood at the window, watching Evelyn. She's not angry, Helen murmured to the manager. No, he replied quietly. She's done waiting. As dusk settled, Evelyn rose slowly. She adjusted her coat, straightened her shoulders. She wasn't finished. Not even close. Because the truth had finally stepped into the light. And once it does, it demands company. Somewhere deep inside the bank's servers, and deeper still inside its past, the numbers were waking up. And tomorrow, they would speak.
By the next morning, the bank's name was everywhere. On television screens mounted above diner counters, on radios murmuring from kitchen tables, on smartphones clutched by commuters who had never set foot in that branch but suddenly felt uneasy about their own accounts. Local bank under fire after elderly customer exposes decades-old error. That was the polite headline. The angrier ones were worse. They stole from her for 41 years. How many others were erased? Evelyn Carter watched none of it. She sat at her small kitchen table, sunlight cutting across the worn wood, a cup of tea cooling untouched in front of her. Her hands rested flat on the surface, steady, as if bracing herself for a storm she knew was coming. The phone rang for the 5th time that morning. She didn't answer. Her answering machine clicked on instead. Miss Carter, this is Channel 7 News. Mrs. Carter, we'd love to hear more about your experience. Evelyn, it's your cousin Lila. Call me back. She let the messages stack. Because she had learned something long ago. When people who ignored you suddenly want to hear you, it's usually because they're afraid. Across town, fear was exactly what filled the executive conference room of the bank's regional headquarters. The room buzzed with voices, legal counsel arguing with compliance officers, PR consultants scrolling furiously through social media dashboards. She's framing this as intentional theft, one lawyer said. That's not what happened, another snapped. It doesn't matter what happened, the PR lead interrupted. It matters what people believe happened. On the wall-mounted screen, a paused image showed Evelyn standing outside the branch, purse on her arm, eyes calm as cameras crowded her. That image is killing us, the PR lead continued. She looks credible. She looks dignified. Someone muttered, because she is. The room went quiet. The regional director cleared his throat. We need to control the narrative. How? Someone asked. By calling an 82-year-old woman a liar? A tense pause. No, the director said slowly, by making her a misunderstanding. Across town, Helen Brooks sat in her office staring at her computer screen. She hadn't slept. Her inbox overflowed. Corporate directives, internal memos, urgent requests to align messaging. But beneath all of it sat one email she hadn't opened yet. Subject line, archived accounts, pre-1985. She hovered her cursor over it. Then clicked. The file was massive, rows and rows of names, most marked with the same cold notation, closed due to system transition. Helen's chest tightened. She scrolled. There were hundreds, thousands. She whispered to herself, "Oh my God." Her phone buzzed. Corporate. She answered reluctantly. "Helen Brooks?" The voice on the other end was crisp. "We need you to sign off on a statement." Helen glanced at the file again. "Have you seen the archive list?" A pause. Too long. "Yes," the voice said carefully. "And you still want to say this was an isolated error?" Another pause. "We want to say it was a limitation of the technology at the time." Helen closed her eyes. "That's not true." "It's sufficient." "No," Helen said quietly, "it's not." The line went cold. Back at Evelyn's apartment, there was a knock at the door. 3 sharp raps. She stood slowly, joins complaining, and opened it. 2 men in suits stood in the hallway, both smiling too quickly. "Miss Carter," one said, "we're here on behalf of the bank." Evelyn looked past them at the empty hallway. "Are you here to apologize?" she asked. They exchanged a glance. "We're here to resolve this amicably." "Then you're late," replied Evelyn. The other man stepped forward. "The bank is prepared to compensate you for the full amount lost plus interest." Evelyn's eyes didn't change. "And the others?" she asked. Another pause. "We are not authorized to discuss hypothetical claims." Evelyn leaned against the doorframe. "You came all this way to buy my silence, but you didn't bring enough money," she said calmly. Their smiles faded. "You're making this more complicated than it needs to be," one of them said. Evelyn's voice dropped, firm but quiet. "No, you made it complicated in 1982. She closed the door gently in their faces. That afternoon, the backlash shifted. It stopped being about Evelyn alone. Former customers began calling news stations. "I was told my account didn't exist. My mother lost everything. They said the records were gone." Stories poured out, some angry, some tearful, some resigned. A pastor spoke on camera about his church losing funds. A retired teacher described cashing out her pension early because her savings vanished. The narrative grew teeth. Inside the bank, panic gave way to desperation. A leaked memo surfaced online. "Prioritize damage containment over historical correction." It went viral in minutes. Evelyn only saw it because her niece sent it to her. She read it once, then again. Then she laughed softly, a sound edged with sadness. "That figures," she murmured. The phone rang again. This time, she answered. "Yes? Miss Carter? It's Helen from the branch." Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. "I wondered when you'd call." "I need to tell you something. They're trying to bury this." Evelyn nodded, even though Helen couldn't see her. "I know. But I won't let them," Helen continued. "I've sent the archive list to an independent auditor." Silence stretched. "That will cost you," Evelyn said gently. "I know," Helen replied, "but it already has." Evelyn's voice softened. "Thank you." The next morning, the bank released a statement. It used careful language, passive verbs, corporate cushioning, but it wasn't enough. Protesters gathered outside several branches. Regulators announced a preliminary investigation. Law firms began advertising historic account recovery services. And through it all, Evelyn remained quiet.
until one final interview request came from not a major network, but from a local radio host with a calm voice and no sponsors shouting in the background. "Miss Carter," he asked gently, "are you angry?" Evelyn considered the question. "No," she said. "Anger burns fast." "Then what are you feeling?" She paused. "Seen," she said, "and that scares people more than anger ever could." The host nodded silently. And somewhere deep in the bank's archives, and deeper still in its conscience, the truth kept surfacing. The backlash wasn't ending. It was just beginning.
Evelyn Carter didn't wake up to sirens or shouting crowds. She woke up to quiet, the kind of quiet that comes before something irreversible. Morning light filtered through the thin curtains of her apartment, touching the framed photographs along the wall. Her late husband in his church suit, her son in a graduation cap, her mother standing outside a bank that no longer existed. Evelyn sat on the edge of her bed for a long moment before standing, listening to the building breathe around her. Pipes knocked, a door slammed somewhere below. Life continued, indifferent. But she could feel it. The shift. By 9 o'clock, the silence was gone. Her phone rang once, then again, then again. This time, the callers weren't journalists or distant relatives. These voices were steadier, legal, measured. "Ms. Carter, this is the office of the State Financial Commissioner." "Mrs. Carter, we're opening a formal inquiry." "Ma'am, we believe your case may represent systemic misconduct." Evelyn wrote nothing down. She didn't need to. She had waited 41 years for someone to finally say the word systemic. Across the city, Helen Brooks packed up her office. Not dramatically, no tears, no slammed drawers. She placed her framed photo of her daughters into a cardboard box, then her mug, "World's okayest manager," then the stack of handwritten notes she'd kept for years. Notes about customers who didn't feel right, accounts that vanished too cleanly, elderly clients who left confused and never came back. Her manager watched from the doorway. "You don't have to do this," he said. Helen sealed the box. "I already did." When she walked out, the branch felt different, smaller, quieter, as if something essential had been removed. At noon, the commissioner's office held a press briefing. No flashy graphics, no polished talking points, just facts. Preliminary findings suggested that during a system migration in the early 1980s, thousands of low-balance, low-activity accounts were flagged and closed without sufficient notice. Funds were absorbed into general holdings. Records were archived, then quietly forgotten. Forgotten, the commissioner said, by the institution, not by the people who earned that money. Reporters leaned forward. One asked, "How many accounts?" The commissioner hesitated. "We don't know yet." Another pressed, "Is this criminal?" The commissioner met the camera. "If intent is established, it may be." The word criminal hit like a bell. By afternoon, the bank's stock dipped sharply. By evening, class action filings began. Evelyn watched none of it. She sat at her kitchen table, the same place she'd balanced checkbooks and paid bills for decades, and opened a manila envelope that had arrived earlier that day. Inside were copies of her original deposit slips, yellowed, fragile, proof she had existed all along. Her hands trembled slightly as she held them, not from fear, but from something closer to relief. A knock came at the door. She opened it to find a young woman standing there, clutching her purse too tightly. "Ms. Carter?" she asked softly. "Yes. My name is Denise. I saw you on the news." Evelyn stepped aside. "Come in." Denise sat, eyes darting around the small apartment. "My grandmother banked there, same branch. She used to say something was wrong, but we thought she was confused." Evelyn nodded. "People always do." Denise swallowed. "She passed away 5 years ago.
We never found her savings." Evelyn reached across the table and covered Denise's hand. She wasn't confused, she said gently. The dam broke. Over the next few days, they came in twos and threes, elderly men with envelopes, widows with handwritten ledgers, adult children carrying questions that had haunted their families for decades. Evelyn listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't rush. She understood something the bank never had. People didn't want money first. They wanted acknowledgement. One afternoon, a man in a pressed suit knocked. He didn't smile. "Mrs. Carter, I'm here on behalf of the bank's board." Evelyn folded her hands. "You're late, too." He cleared his throat. "We're prepared to issue a public apology." She raised an eyebrow. "For me?" "For everyone," he said. She studied him carefully. "And will it say what you did, or just that you're sorry someone noticed?" He hesitated. That told her everything. "Come back," she said calmly, "when the truth is cheaper than the lie." The next morning, a document leaked, an internal memo from 1983. Subject: Dormant Account Reallocation Strategy. It outlined it in plain language: accounts under a certain threshold, minimal activity, limited likelihood of dispute. It said, low risk. Evelyn read the excerpt printed in the paper and felt something loosen in her chest. There it was. Not a glitch, a choice. That afternoon, the bank's CEO resigned. By evening, federal investigators announced involvement. And for the first time since this began, Evelyn felt tired. Not the bone-deep exhaustion of survival, but the gentle fatigue that comes after standing your ground for a long time. She sat in her armchair as the sun dipped low, casting the room in amber. Her phone buzzed with a text from Helen. "They're calling it historic." Evelyn smiled faintly. History, she knew, was just memory with witnesses. Later that night, she turned on the television. A reporter stood outside the same bank branch. An 82-year-old woman's refusal to use an ATM has uncovered what may be one of the largest financial oversights in state history, and today she broke her silence. The screen cut to Evelyn herself, seated at the kitchen table, hands folded. "I never stopped trusting banks. I stopped trusting shortcuts." The reporter asked, "What do you want now?" Evelyn's answer was steady. "I want the people who were ignored to be found." The room went quiet. Even the anchor paused. In her apartment, Evelyn turned off the TV. She looked around at the small space that had held her grief, her patience, her faith, and for the first time in years, she felt heard. But the story wasn't finished, because truth doesn't end when it's exposed. It ends when it's answered. And that reckoning was coming next.
The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Not by courier, not by press release, not announced on television. Just a thick envelope, cream-colored, official, slid halfway under Evelyn Carter's front door, like it was afraid to be seen. She stared at it for a long moment before picking it up. The return address made her exhale slowly. United States Department of Justice. She carried it to the kitchen table, the same table where this whole storm had begun, and sat down. Her hands were steady now. Whatever was inside, she had already lived through worse. Inside the envelope were three things: a formal notice confirming the federal investigation, a preliminary restitution estimate, not just for her but for thousands, and a single-page letter, unsigned, typed in careful legal language. "Ms. Carter, your testimony has altered the course of this inquiry. We will need you." Evelyn folded the paper once, then twice. For 41 years, no one had needed her. Now, suddenly, they did. The hearing room was packed. Cameras lined the walls. Lawyers whispered urgently. Bank executives sat stiff-backed, their confidence replaced by something brittle and performative.
Evelyn entered quietly, leaning on her cane, wearing a navy blue coat she'd owned for 15 years. No jewelry, no statement pins. She didn't need them. The room shifted when she took her seat. The judge adjusted his glasses. "Ms. Carter," he said, voice measured, "thank you for being here." She nodded. "I've been waiting." They asked her everything. Dates, amounts, conversations she'd had decades earlier, the names of tellers who no longer worked there, the moment she realized her money was gone. She answered calmly. When asked why she hadn't let it go, she didn't raise her voice. Because letting it go is what they counted on. A murmur rippled through the room. One attorney tried to frame it as confusion. Another suggested memory failure. A third implied the bank had acted within the norms of the time. Evelyn waited. Then she leaned forward. "Norms," she said quietly, "are just habits people stop questioning." Silence. The judge cleared his throat. "Ms. Carter," he asked gently, "what would justice look like to you?" Evelyn didn't hesitate. "Justice," she said, "isn't a check. It's a record that says we were here." Outside the courthouse, the crowd had grown. Elderly men held folders, women clutched yellowed passbooks, adult children stood beside parents who had been told for years they were misremembering. When Evelyn stepped out, someone clapped. Then another. Then dozens. She raised her hand, embarrassed. "I didn't do this alone. I just refused to stay quiet." That night, the bank released a statement. A real one this time. Not regret. Not sympathy, responsibility. They acknowledged the program, the intent, the harm. They announced a restitution fund, a review board, an external audit. And for the first time, they used the word wrong without conditions. Within weeks, checks began arriving, not just to Evelyn, to thousands. Some were small, some were life-changing, but every envelope carried the same message. You were right. Denise returned, tears in her eyes, holding a check made out to her late grandmother's estate. "They found it," she whispered. "All of it." Evelyn hugged her. Others came too. People who had never trusted banks again, people who would blame themselves, people who had died before they could see this moment. Evelyn kept a list, names of those who never got their envelopes. She read it every Sunday. The bank branch changed. New staff, new signage, new policies, but one thing stayed the same, the old counter. Evelyn walked in one final time, unannounced. A young teller looked up, startled. "Miss Carter," she said, recognizing her instantly. "Yes," Evelyn replied. "I just wanted to make a deposit." The teller smiled nervously. "Of course." Evelyn slid a small envelope across the counter. Inside was a single $1. "What's this for?" the teller asked. Evelyn met her eyes. "To remind you," she said softly, "that every account starts with trust." The teller nodded, swallowing hard. Months later, the story slowed. News moved on. Hashtags faded. But the changes didn't. New regulations were passed. Dormant account laws were rewritten. Notices became mandatory, records digitized and preserved. Evelyn was invited to panels, interviews, advisory boards. She declined most of them. She preferred her mornings quiet. Coffee at the table, light through the window, a sense of balance restored. One afternoon, Helen visited. They sat together, watching traffic pass below. "You know," Helen said, "they're teaching this case in training now." Evelyn smiled. "Good. They call it the Carter Principle." Evelyn laughed softly. "Sounds expensive." Helen hesitated. "Do you ever wish you'd trusted the ATM?" Evelyn shook her head. "I didn't distrust the machine. I distrusted the system that hid behind it." She stood up, bones creaking slightly, and looked out at the city. "So many people thought I was just an old woman holding up a line.
but lines are where you see who gets impatient when they're asked to wait. Helen nodded. Evelyn's birthday, a small package arrived. Inside was a plaque, in honor of Evelyn Carter, for restoring what was forgotten. She placed it on the shelf beside her husband's photo. "See," she murmured, "they finally listened." That evening, she walked past the bank again. A young man stood at the ATM, frustrated. "It ain't my card," he muttered. Evelyn paused. She didn't scold him, didn't say, "I told you so." She simply smiled and kept walking. Some lessons, she knew, people had to learn in their own time. But one thing was certain: no one would ever ignore her again. And, more importantly, no one like her would ever be ignored the same way. Because one elderly black woman stood her ground, and the silence finally broke.